before. My name is David Hales, and I'm the K-12 Social Studies consultant here at WayneRESA. So I'm really glad that you're here and excited to hear from Betsy and from Maureen. So if there are any questions for me or for Katie, just go ahead and put those in the chat. If not, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Betsy, correct? Excellent. All right, thanks. Thank you, everybody.
Well, hello. My name is Betsy Peterson, and I'm the Director of Learning to Give. And I'm here with Maureen. And Maureen, will you please just introduce who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Maureen Klein. I teach 4th grade in Allen Park, and I've been partnering with Learning to Give for 3 years now. I began as a teacher in residence and then able to continue that partnership in various forms. And so this session actually offshoot of that original teacher in residence summer. So excited to be here and continue to grow and build on those concepts.
So this workshop provides tips and tools for trauma-informed practice and social-emotional learning while you're empowering kids to be caring and engaged citizens. And as you know, our students' lives and school experiences are unpredictable and uncertain. Many of them have experienced different degrees of trauma and a decreased sense of security. You have also experienced trauma and unreasonable expectations. So we're going to look together today at ways we can address the impact of trauma before we expect learning. And there couldn't be a better time to teach students the attitudes and behaviors of caring and responsible citizenship. By learning to give, students figure out what they're good at, what they value, and how they can use that in service to others for a better world. And that is our work at Learning to Give. And before we dive into some trauma-informed practices and mindfulness activities, we just want to do a little icebreaker to welcome you and hear your voices. So the simple question as we enter fall, I guess we're fully into fall, would you rather be too hot or too cold? And we'd love to have you turn on your camera and unmute and answer your question with your name, where you teach, and the answer to that question. If you prefer to use the chat, that is okay. And so I will start. I would rather be too hot. I do love the whole time from May to November where I can be outside riding my bike. And in the winter when it's too cold, I can't do those things. So I'm going to tag Maureen to be next, and then Maureen, you can tag somebody.
Awesome. Again, I'm Maureen Klein, and that actually is a tricky question for me because in the classroom, I'm going to say I'd rather be too cold because then I can put on a sweater. And I like these classrooms are so darn hot, especially with the masks, and I can't take the mask off, and I can't take enough off to get cold. So I would prefer to be too cold in this space, but in general, I agree with Betsy. I'd prefer to be too hot. I love that. Maybe that's my tie to summer as well. I'm not sure. I'm gonna popcorn it out to Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Shani Budziak. I teach 7th and 8th grade science at Cecil Middle School in Riverview, and I would definitely rather be too hot than too cold. Because when it's cold in the wintertime, it literally hurts my bones, and I don't like it at all. So I'd rather be too hot. I will turn it over to, is it Tara?
Yes, hi, I'm Tara Yanari. I work at Summer Camp Schools in the special ed preschool program. I would rather be too hot too, because I prefer to be outside in warm weather doing fun things, and cold weather, ooh. So I prefer that. Thank you for being here. And I will send it off to Lisa Kemmerling.
Hi, my name's Lisa Kemmerling, and I'd rather be too hot. And I took a leave of absence from the school that I teach at. I taught kindergarten last year. This year I am tutoring K-8. And I will pass it on to Haley Turner.
Hi, I'm Haley. I teach 5th grade at Waginga in the Woodhaven Brownstown School District. I probably agree with most of you. I'd rather be too hot than too cold. I love to be in a pool or anything like, or be at a lake. So those are kind of my ways to kind of keep cold. So I'd rather definitely be too hot than be too cold. I will pop it over to Tracy. Oh, there's 2 Tracys.
Hi, I'm Tracy Hatfield.
Okay.
I teach kindergarten at Shelters Elementary in Southgate. I am on a family medical leave right now. My dog is barking in the background, but I'm curious. I would rather be too cold because I could put more clothes on. I hate being too hot, especially in the classroom. We don't have air conditioning and there's nothing I can do to cool off. And I will turn it over to Keith.
Hi, I'm Keith Gall. I'm actually coming back to teaching after being out of it for a few years. I know that's definitely not the trend these days to go the other direction and swim against the tide, but I'll be going back to teaching this coming school year, and I would definitely rather be too cold for all the reasons previously stated. I will lob this one over to the other Tracy, Tracy Eccles.
Okay, hello, I'm Tracy Eccles. I would rather be too cold than too hot. I worked at DPSCD, the virtual school. I am a resource teacher. I don't know, is it another question I should be answering? I had a hard time getting over here, so I think I missed a little bit of the beginning of it.
That's it, Tracy. Just go ahead and pick someone who hasn't had a chance to introduce themselves.
Okay, I don't know, did she have a chance yet?
I think so. How about P-I-S-A-N-T-I-K? I don't want to mispronounce that.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Or how about Susan Troxel?
Hello, how are you? For some reason, I don't think my camera's working. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I just got on. Was I supposed to introduce myself?
Yeah, so Susan, the question that we're doing for an icebreaker is, would you rather be too hot or too cold? And tell us where you teach.
Okay, I think I'd rather be too cold because then I can put a sweater on. It's pretty uncomfortable when you're too hot. I know my classroom used to be very cold. I'm from Mackenzie Pre-K, GSRP, and I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a lot of lower L. How about Maria?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just joined a little late. What was the question?
Maria, we're answering the question, would you rather be too hot or too cold, and also telling where you teach.
Oh, okay. I work at a Bethune Elementary School up in Detroit, and I'd rather be too hot. I do not like the cold. I'll be hot.
All right, did I miss anybody? Susan? No, I think we have gotten everybody who wanted to speak. David, would you like to tell us what you prefer, hot or cold?
Yeah, there's no question I would take the too cold one. Combination of growing up in northern Michigan, so I think I'm a little more used to the cold. Plus, let's just say I'm of the body type of which being hot, in the summer is not particularly comfortable. I'll take cold any day.
And Katie, we'd love to hear from you too. And that's okay if you prefer not.
No, I'm here. I'm just I'm watching my daughter who's watching Bluey, if any of you have entered that realm of hell. I'm doing a little bit of juggling. My name is Katie Mock, and I support David Hales in our social studies department, our department of one. He's a rock star. And I would rather be cold because I have a fireplace that I only get to use in Michigan in the winter, which is like 8 months in Michigan, but that is my preference. So, and there's my dog.
Thank you, everybody. And I just want to make sure I haven't missed anybody. Maureen, I'm going to pass it over to you. And
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So before we jump into trauma-informed practices and how that looks in our classroom and what that is and kind of why and the connection ultimately to the work that Learning to Give does and how we can support you in your classrooms, we want to begin with a mindful moment. So I'm going to start with a video from Go Noodle. So many of you may be familiar with Go Noodle, and you may be familiar with their series of mindful moments, such as the one here. And this one is little over a minute. Many of the Think About series kind of fall into that zone. I thought at the end of a school day, this one might be an appropriate one for us. So with that, Betsy, so settle in.
Think about it. Sit or stand up straight. Take a deep breath and follow along. Do you ever hold on to a bad experience or an old memory? And it bugs you? And it bothers you? And you can't stop replaying it in your mind? Take a moment to think of something negative that you've been holding on to. And release it. Let it go. Float away. Bye-bye, bad thoughts. Bye.
Want more stuff like this? We got it!
Thanks, Betsy. It's being said a lot, and I actually heard a colleague recently say to me, if I hear one more person tell me I need to focus on my self-care, I'm going to scream. So I want to be very cautious and gentle about talking about the need for us as educators to really take time to focus on ourselves and check in with ourselves and make sure that we're okay. The analogy of putting on our own oxygen masks before we put on another in an airplane is very real, particularly when it comes to trauma-informed practices and trauma-informed teaching. And yet it is at times just one more thing on the to-do list. That being said, we know that intentionally carving time for ourselves, for our own mental health, and to just acknowledge the experience that we're going through in education in all of its various forms is important to the work that we're doing. And so before we start sharing content with you, we actually wanted to take just 60 seconds to pause and let you reflect. You know, Betsy and I spent a little bit of time talking about this, and initially we were thinking, you know, go outside. Like often, you know, we get so cooped up inside, like go outside, maybe try this activity or another, you know, grab a leaf and do a leaf rubbing. But what we realized is we want to honor the time that we have together today. And so we're just going to ask you right now to take a moment, grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and for 60 seconds, and I literally have my phone, so I'm going to time us, write what's going on in your brain. Whatever it is that you brought to this session, whether it's a worry about your classroom or your studies or a student or your child or your dog or your car, what is it that you're bringing to this session with? And think I've stalled slightly enough that hopefully everyone has something to write on. I'm going to start our timer now. So for just the next 60 seconds, we're going to do a stop and jot. Anything that's on your brain, put it on the paper. All right, you may begin. And pause. From that moment of pause and that moment of reflection, as we head into the true meat of this time together, we want to invite you to set an intention for your time here. What are you hoping to get out of this session? What brought you here to this time? Your time is very precious. It really is consistently pre-pandemic, and certainly now in kind of the hopefully tail end of our pandemic time. Time is that one thing that has been so precious and such a constraint for us in education. So you chose to be here. What are you hoping to get out of this? What is your intention? And if you would like to share, we'd love for you to put your intention in the chat, and then we'll continue on. Betsy, will you move on to the next slide?
Do you want the Jamboard or do you want the next slide?
Oh, lo siento. I apologize. I was jumping right ahead. Jumping right ahead. Yes, absolutely. As we're thinking about setting our intentions and the importance of pausing, that actually is going to be incorporated into what we're talking about from a trauma-informed practice. Intentionally in your day, weaving throughout your day with your students an opportunity to pause and take a mindful moment will have a positive impact on the learning outcomes and certainly the behavior outcomes in your classroom. So what we are going to invite you to do, we're going to send you into breakout rooms, is take a moment to consider what ideas that you already have, thoughts that you've already, or strategies that you've already incorporated into your classroom and into your life for self-care and mindful moments with students. And so Betsy is dropping or she already has, great, the Jamboard that we're going to be using throughout today to kind of collect and curate our ideas. The first one that we have in there is on the mindful moments. And so we're going to take a moment in small groups to talk about strategies that we have used for self-care and mindful moments, and how does it feel to pause. So the follow-up question to that, to the mindful moment, whether it was the Go Noodle video or simply the 60-second pause, is to reflect on how does it feel to pause, to take a pause. And really we want to talk about how it feels for us so that when we're translating these activities to kids, that we have kind of that intuitive internal sense of what that feels like. So would anyone like to share out what they talked about in their breakout room, or specifically reflect on what it feels like to take a pause?
I can talk.
Thanks.
Okay, so it does feel very nice and calming to take a pause. It's just like all the things that go on in your mind, you kind of have like a minute to just calm down and relax about things and not be so stressed out. Some things that we mentioned, they said like just like reading, doing mindfulness activities, breathing, counting down. Those would be all things that might help us.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Jenny. Would anyone else like to build on that or add to that? All right, I'm going to continue. Go ahead, David, please.
No, I was just going to say we had someone in our group mention yoga, using yoga, and someone say that listening to relaxing music at home, and that they did that before. And then what really sort of caught my attention was someone mentioned wanting to pick up something that they had done previously, which was ballroom dancing as a form of relaxation. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, David. And I think that's really interesting too, because when you ask kids that question, you get the diversity of answers for them as well. So ballroom dancing isn't actually on my list, but definitely is, I could see that activity would be helping create a sense of calm for someone. I asked the students recently of the strategies that we've been employing in our classroom to kind of help us focus and center and calm ourselves. What times of the day and what type of activities were helpful for them? And one of the students said math. Like, she loves numbers, and so working with numbers actually calms her down. That was just really interesting, and that's what I thought of when you said the ballroom dancing. That what is a mindful activity for individuals might not be for someone else, but some of these strategies that you mentioned, and certainly that are in the Mindful Moment Jamboard as well, such as breathing, counting down, really just sitting. We know that there's a lot of brain-based research that shows it literally affects how we're physiologically feeling and what's going on inside our bodies by just the act of noticing our breathing and slowing that breathing down. So thank you for sharing that. And notice that Betsy's kind of rearranging our mindful moments, kind of helping to curate and organize those. And we will do that. And we chose to use the Jamboard so that you could have that as a resource, almost like a note-taking option for you. And it has some links embedded in there as well when you leave. So immediately, not even, you don't have to wait until tomorrow, you'll have access to the ideas and resources that we brought to you and that you helped us curate and collaborate with. So we're going to pivot now to the concept of trauma-informed practices, and we're going to watch about a minute or so of this this introductory video from the state of Michigan. So Betsy, will you go ahead and cue that? And you know where the pause is on that one?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome exam. But no, by all means, go ahead.
That's not where we're starting. Hold on. We'll try again.
I had it queued up.
I'm not hearing sound, Betsy. Maybe because you're muted. You're muted, so it may mute the sound when you're playing your video.
Increased the risk for 7 out of 10 leading causes of death in the U.S.
Yep, so will you bring it all
And
the way
by
back?
some estimates, is responsible for 50% of healthcare costs in the U.S. It occurs in every type of community, from small towns and rural villages to big cities and upscale suburbs. It affects our brain development, immune systems, our hormone systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. This exposure is not a pesticide or chemical, not a pathogen or pollutant. It's chronic childhood trauma. Adverse childhood experiences leave our children susceptible to poor health and unable to learn, and our adults unable to interact, work, and function socially. But there is a way forward, and the path starts here.
What we've learned from the
That video comes from the Michigan ACE initiative, Adverse Childhood Experiences Initiative. And I felt that it was a really good beginning point for a conversation about trauma-informed practices in our classrooms. Full disclosure, I'm learning on this journey as well. In my partnership with Learning to Give, through these years, we really have been focusing on community and building community, and very early realized that there's a tie to what's happening in the space around adverse childhood experiences and the trauma-informed practices within our classroom. So as a learner myself, my hope today is to kind of share some of the experiences that we've had in my classroom and talk about some of the research behind these practices and how they can be woven through your experiences with the students and children that you work with. In that Michigan ACE initiative video, I think the really interesting thing about that is it speaks to the impact that trauma has on children, the lifelong impact, that it literally changes the way their brains function, it changes their genetics. There's some studies coming out about how trauma over generations can be manifested. So, when you think about the evolution of species and animals and how traits are passed down, the impact of trauma and how we respond to trauma, well, it also kind of fits that changes what we do too. So how children survive trauma is baked into their genetic code that they're then passing on to their children. And it affects everything from the behaviors we're seeing with our preschoolers in the classrooms to high school graduation rate, to success in jobs. It affects all aspects of our life. It certainly affects the medical outcomes for people. So the studies out of California with Kaiser Permanente, that's where it originally came from in terms of the ACE initiatives. They really were looking at it from a health outcome, a physical health outcome. And they were the initial impetus for the research surrounding trauma-informed practices. So Betsy, if you'll share that next screen. So, want to really talk about what we're looking at when we're dealing with children. And the image that we have here is a continuum of restorative practices. And I really want to emphasize that when we're talking about interactions with children who have trauma, and of course, these days, we're saying that all children have experienced trauma because they went through the pandemic. They were in school one day and then the next day they were gone. And in some cases, some students didn't come back until this fall or not yet even. And so the instability of the pandemic and the impact on them is real. But what we're looking at from trauma-informed practices in our classroom is how we can address the behaviors that we're seeing as a result of the trauma. The behaviors that we're seeing from our students really are communicating what they're experiencing and what they're feeling. It may not be able to articulate, oops, hold on, my classroom lights turn off. And there's no way I can keep them permanently on after a certain point, they automatically go off. So sorry about that. Their behaviors communicate a lot to us. So just want a quick question. For those of you that are actively working with children, what are some of the negative behaviors that you're seeing in your space with kids right now? If you want to type those into the chat or unmute, what behaviors are you noticing in kids these days that you think that maybe you didn't see as much of before, or you think are in response to their experience in COVID? What are you seeing in the space that you're working with kids? Quiet, regression, absolutely. Hearing a lot these days about students, and thank you, Betsy. Emotional development almost kind of being on pause for many of them as they didn't interact with a lot of people. And so that behavior is looking more immature. A lot of fighting and a lack of being able to problem solve or process out, absolutely. In my classroom, I've been noticing some pretty big emotions. So I've seeing a lot of crying, which wasn't as typical as we're seeing in the past. So behaviors such as the fight, flight, or freeze really are children responses to trauma. And what we as adults need to model, which is why we began with our own mindful moment, is the way forward and a sense of calm so that we can find resolution to the behaviors that we're seeing. Really, our intent is to help students enter into our sense of peace and our sense of calm to find a way forward for them. And I notice that oftentimes it's easy to get caught up in the chaos of a classroom or the response to some extreme behaviors that you're seeing. And what we need to do as adults, and what is extremely powerful, is model that sense of calm. One of the trainings that I had the opportunity to go through in talking about trauma-informed practices and mindfulness with students had a great visual, and I actually then of course went on Amazon and bought it. And so I want to begin, before we talk about what that continuum of restorative practices looks like, is to kind of share that with you. So think about a student who is not self-regulated and is kind of like all over the place. And for those of you who are in elementary today, my guess is this is a little bit of what you were seeing, because Halloween is tomorrow and we absolutely cannot handle ourselves. If we, as adults, approach the student who is unself-regulated and not able to handle their big emotions, whatever those big emotions are, and respond with our own big emotions, one feeds off of the other. However, if we as adults, when the child is unself-regulated and experiencing a lack of self-control, can come into that conversation and that situation modeling a sense of calm and peace, we can help the student ultimately model and get back to that sense themselves. We are not responsible for their behavior, but what we bring into the interaction can either escalate it or provide a model for self-control and ultimately help and hope to find their self-regulation. I love this visual because kids get this, and you can use it with kids in class, right? And even talk about themselves. Like, when I'm feeling like this, what do I need to do to kind of bring myself back to this place? What strategies, what tips, what tricks, what can I do to get to this place? And as we've already mentioned, for different students, it's going to be different things. So we've talked a little bit about the why. It affects the adverse childhood experiences. Every person who has that has a trauma of some way, shape, or form, and it has the potential to impact them throughout the course of their life. Right now, we've all been going through a trauma experience, which makes this class and this conversation even more important and more relevant, and that we can have an impact on what's happening. What I want to say before we break down the continuum is to really clearly state the goal of any of these practices or any of these interventions is not to eliminate the behavior. That would be fantastic. If we could eliminate the negative behaviors, if we could eliminate fighting instead of talking problems out, or those significant moments of crying or big outbursts, that would be wonderful. But that isn't actually the goal of the trauma-informed practices. Our goal as educators is really to minimize those where possible. So we are hoping to help teach and model for the students a way to minimize the frequency and duration of those experiences, ultimately leading to turning it over to them. But really, we want to minimize and reduce the frequency of those experiences. So I'd like to talk about the continuum of restorative practices. And I think that this is really critical because there really are two sides to it. So if a student is out on the playground, he goes to line up and is annoying his neighbor kicks him. Well, that is something that we need to address. That's a negative behavior, obviously, but we need to have a restorative practice that responds to that. So in the trauma-informed practices, it isn't excusing or allowing negative behavior, but it is acknowledging that this happened and that there needs to be some sort of restoration of relationship. And so on the one end, that's where we're looking at in terms of that. So that is a result of minor incidences or issues up to a physical assault, or, not, I guess assault is a big word, but the kicking that would require conversation within the classroom or with the individual, and then ultimately a conference with that particular student. Those responsive behaviors are really when the behavior occurs and we need to intervene. And it isn't excusing them, but it is helping the student pause and try and reflect on what happened in order to then take ownership on that behavior and restore that relationship that has been hurt in some particular way. If you notice though, the overwhelming or the majority of the continuum really is on preventative relationship or the preventative side. What we're looking to do with that is to build and maintain those relationships. And here's where I want to pause, because in trauma-informed practices, I really jumped into this a few years ago, had a very challenging class. It's one of those classes where it's coming, you hear it year after year, and it's kind of building. And I jumped into this training really hoping to improve my practices and perfect my practices and find that magic bullet, right? I was going to find the answer to address the concerns that I knew were coming my way. And unfortunately, there isn't a magic bullet. I really wanted one. Bought a couple books, went to several training, and I wanted something that was going to say, okay, here's what you can do to significantly impact the negative behaviors, to build the relationships with the kids. This is the idea that's going to work. And there really isn't. The magic bullet isn't magic. Time after time, resource after resource really talks about the impact of that foundational relationship with the teacher. It talks about building community and classroom procedures that provide consistency for students. It's recognizing and acknowledging the uniqueness of each student and honoring their identities in your classroom. Do they see themselves reflected? It's meeting them at the door and having conversations with them. Do they see themselves reflected in the curriculum? So we need to, as educators, really pause and recognize that those preventative sides, those things that we do to build and maintain relationships, are in keeping with trauma-informed practices. You're already doing it in your classroom. And those are the things that will have the biggest impact on the behaviors that you're seeing in your classroom. Betsy, will you go to the Jamboard for me? So we wanted to give you resources to kind of delve into this further. And as I said, I'm a learner in this process as well. Wayne County RESA, the link there is to their PBIS page, but in there are a lot of resources on, even to the point of my student is freezing in class. What are some ideas for me to try and address that, or try to build a relationship with that student? So RESA itself has multiple day-long trainings, or at least they have in the past, on the trauma-informed practices in the ACE initiative particularly. There we go. So that was one of the resources that we put on the Jamboard for you. Another is the link to the Michigan website on the Michigan ACE initiative. That minute or so that we watched at the beginning is actually a full 20-minute video, and embedded in there are all kinds of resources, including several videos that speak to what adverse childhood experiences are and the impact in your communities, and what both educators and parents can do to support children specifically. And a couple of my favorites are Betsy found the Edutopia, What Are Trauma-Informed Practices? Edutopia has done a lot of really great work if you haven't found your way there. And what I like about the Edutopia videos specifically is that it shows you real teachers in real classrooms. They're very slick, so they're wonderfully shot, video shots and edited, but it is actual students with actual teachers. And I think that I find that to be really helpful in terms of trauma-informed resources. And then lastly,
interrupt you a minute, Lauren, too.
Oh, sure.
In that particular video is they talk about so I made that note too, that the preventative measures include a lot of the social emotional practices you have.
Thank you, Betsy. And Mind Shift from KQED, that's out of California. So it's connected to public radio, National Public Radio, and they have a whole series on education embedded inside there. So that one, you'd have to look a little bit in terms of looking for trauma-informed practices or social emotional learning, but they are a lovely source for additional information in there. And in that most recently, they have been focusing in on behavioral challenges that we're specifically seeing this year. And a lot of it is around that dysregulation. And so as students spent so much time at home in a variety of different settings, there was that lack of common experience in the classroom. Returning to the classroom has been really challenging for many of them. And what we as educators can do is really to provide that predictability so they know what to anticipate when they come in and build those relationships. Our goal really is to minimize the negative behaviors that we're seeing and reduce the severity of those impacts so that ultimately we can, thanks Betsy, help the students develop a sense of self-regulation so that they have tools and tricks and experiences to turn to when they're feeling those big emotions themselves without needing an adult to intervene. So, Betsy, I think we're at a point in which we can head back into breakout rooms. And that we pull that Jamboard up so that,
yes.
Thank you.
Forgive me for being slow on managing all these things.
No, I appreciate you. Here
we go. Is that right?
That's exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Okay.
I do want to state as well, when we're talking about approaching our teaching practices with a trauma-informed lens, what we're hoping to do is remove barriers to learning. So, obviously I'm in my classroom and I look up and I look to a particular chair that a particular student sits in, and I've never had a student more clearly exhibit the freeze response to trauma or stress than this student, to the point where someone on the other side of the room literally said, this student so-and-so froze, he's frozen. That's a barrier to his learning. In working with that particular student, I'm actually literally using that language of, let's try this strategy or this strategy because we want you to get back to your learning as quickly as you can. And so whether it is the flight, the fright, and actually been hearing a lot of increase in flight. I don't know if any of you have experienced that in your classrooms or heard other educators talking about that. A lot more kids are running than we've had in the past, which can be super scary because sometimes they run in unsafe places. But flight, fight, or freeze, all of those responses are a barrier to their learning, and we want to help them develop those self-regulation skills and strategies to be able to get back to their learning and maximize the time that they're with us. This chart is fantastic because it allows, it has both the responsive and preventative side, but it also talks about specific details underneath. So in the case of the student who got kicked in line, a formal conference was warranted in terms of how to go about addressing that behavior for them, all the way down to classroom practices that build relationships. So what we're going to invite you to do is, in a breakout room, look at the chart. And the intent really with this time is both to highlight for yourself, what am I already doing that's actually trauma-informed practice? Because more likely than not, there's a lot that you are. And what in this continuum do you wonder about, or would you like to know more about, or are curious about incorporating into your practices? And what we have done is essentially chunked it into 3 different colors. So we're inviting you to do 3 things in this time. Number 1, what do you notice? So looking at the continuum of restorative practices, what's something that you notice? What stands out for you? What's something you're already doing, or that for those of you that aren't in the classroom right now, what have you already done? Or whether it's in your own classroom or with a group of kids that you've worked with in the past. And then lastly, of course, what's something that you wonder about? So I notice, I'm already doing, and I wonder. We're going to invite you to do that in a breakout room so you can talk with the other people while you're doing it, kind of getting that interactive element to it. And then when we wrap that up, so I'm thinking, Betsy, we'll do that for about 5 minutes and then take a break. Is that all right? Okay. So after you do your noticing, your wondering, and what you're already doing, we're going to invite you to take a break. We'll all come back at 5:05. Does that work for you, Betsy? So 5 minutes for the Jamboard and then 5 minutes for a break? Mm-hmm. Personal break, like, obviously. Does that work? Fantastic. What questions does anyone have?
So I put the link for the Jamboard in the chat again. So go ahead and just work with your sticky notes with your small group. And if you want to take a break, take a break. Otherwise, keep talking, and we'll be back here at 5:05.
Everyone. So want to take just a moment to make the connection between the restorative practices and building community. And we were looking at the Jamboard, and a couple of you kind of called that out. When we're talking about trauma-informed practices, building community is a key focus of that, an essential tenet of that. We need to intentionally, as educators, create time and space for generous listening. When we think about what's happening in our country in this last couple of years, all that has been happening in our country, fostering in our students the ability to generously listen to each other and build community will certainly have a positive impact, not just on our classrooms, but potentially our state, our country, and our world. Generous listening can be in the form of classroom meetings. Classroom meetings don't just have to be at the beginning of the day. They can be woven throughout your day. They can be part of your procedures for how you come back from lunch. It could be the bookends of your time with the students. Those classroom meetings can take long, and you can set aside intentional time to really delve into a particular topic if needed, but they can also simply be a check-in. And so we're going to model a classroom meeting right now in our virtual format right here. And just what I'm going to invite you all to do right now is to raise your hands virtually, if you will. If you can raise your hand in your participants. So if you look at participants, one of your options is to raise a hand, because then everyone should be able to kind of see those hands in Zoom. We'll test your Zoom knowledge. Tara found it. All right, we've got several people popping those hands up. That's fantastic. So we're going to raise those hands virtually in Zoom. So I have a few of them raised, and we're going to do a classroom meeting. This one is actually simply a one-word check-in, and we're on Zoom, so it takes a little bit longer than in person because we kind of have to tag out the next person. But I'm going to begin with a one-word check-in, and then I'm going to popcorn it to someone else who has their hand raised, and then that person will call on someone who has their hand raised. So again, us adults in Zoom, we're used to leading and not being the learner. So do try and remember to lower your hand after you have had a chance to share. We're just going to do a one-word check-in. So in this, this activity, just one word to describe how you're feeling right now. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about setting our intention and gave you a moment to kind of do that brain dump of getting everything out. But what is your one word check-in right now? And the kicker is it literally is one word. So you don't get to explain the feeling. It's just kind of a piece of what you're bringing to this experience today. So my one word, and I'm just going to go with the one that came to mind, is worried. So with that, I'm going to popcorn it to Haley.
My one word is overwhelmed. I'll popcorn it to Lisa.
Struggling. And I'll put it over to Jennifer.
Hi, my one word would be tired. I'm just tired. I'm gonna popcorn it over to Susan.
Is that Susan Traxel?
Yeah.
I would just say exhausted. And then I'm gonna popcorn it over to Tracy.
Which one?
Oh, now I lost it. Hold on, I'm looking at the name. Tracy Eccles?
I am confused.
Who would you like to go next, Tracy?
Me? I'm sorry, Tracy.
Tracy Hatfield, yep.
Can you hear me?
I heard you, Tracy Eccles, but Tracy Hatfield, you're still muted.
Oh, okay.
Okay, focused is my word. Let's go with David.
I would say energized, and I'm going to go to Keith. He's not gone yet, correct?
Right.
Okay, all right.
Excited. I'll go to Lisa.
I think Lisa already went.
Yes, I did.
Sarah, have you gone?
I see, I have hands up for Susan McWilliams and Betsy. So, go ahead, Betsy.
I'll go. I feel curious, and I'm going to popcorn it over to Susan.
I feel enlightened, and I will go to, I can't see this, Tara.
My word is busy, and I think I might be the last person. Or is Betsy still need to go?
Nope, you're good. You're the last person with the hand up. So I stopped it. We are at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's with Zoom, us figuring out Zoom and mute and whatnot. Obviously, there's 13 of us, but this is an activity that you can do in your meetings with your classrooms. You can do it certainly at the beginning of the week. You can do it in the morning. You can do it in the afternoon. It really is enlightening to hear what the students are bringing to this space and kind of get a quick pulse. It allows you then to say, oh, geez, I want to come back around and double check and find out why my student is overwhelmed. What is it that's going on? That isn't necessarily the time for the conversation, but it does give you an understanding of what they're bringing to the space which will allow us to be more empathetic and more responsive to their needs as we try and launch into things like comparing and contrasting and division and fractions, right? If they're coming into it with some of those feelings already, we know that we're going to need to help ensure that they're feeling calm and welcomed and invited in the space before they have access to some of that other content. So that now is going to allow us to kind of transition over to Betsy. And truly, I agree with Betsy when she said at the beginning that there really isn't more important time than now to kind of look at the impact of ways that we can build community in our classrooms and then within our own extended communities and the impact that that can have. When students learn to control themselves, they're better able to help their community. And they're certainly, when they help their community, we know that they feel ownership and have a sense of place within that space. And they can help be a safe space for each other. And at this time in which there is so much trauma, both in our students' lives, in our own lives, the secondary trauma that we have just by working with these kids all of the time, we know that we need to help intentionally create community so that we can all thrive. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Betsy.
So Maureen, I just want to confirm we're not going to do the class meeting ideas. We're going to skip that.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. So in your Jamboard, there is another page that has ideas for classroom meetings. We want to, as a community here in this particular session, learn from each other. So as you're going to have an opportunity a little bit later to kind of look at some things individually, and we're going to ask you to consider sharing, if you are so willing, things that you have done in a class meeting or questions that you might ask. So we're not going to devote individual time to it right now, but we invite you to consider sharing your good ideas with us as we have seeded some of them there for you to kind of, again, help build the toolbox for all of us so that we are better prepared to address the needs of our students.
Thank you. All right. So as we've talked about, our classrooms are communities. And as Maureen so wisely has said over the years, is relationships in those communities are key. And so if you're overwhelmed, if this is a lot of information about restorative practices, if you take away one thing today, it's that we're a community and we're going to just keep moving toward relationships in those communities. I have a friend who's a second grade teacher who said she came into her year and her kids had clearly experienced a lot of trauma. They were not connected. They weren't a community, and they weren't following routines. They weren't getting along. There was a lot of bickering. She just really felt like, oh, I don't know what's going on. And she used our Blue Sky activity that we'll point out to you later. And it's an envisioning activity that helps kids identify what they care about and what they're concerned about and what could be better. And she found out in her community that a lot of her kids were concerned about where their next meal was going to come from, and was their grandpa going to be there for them when they got home from school that day, and were they going to lose their home? There were just really fundamental concerns they were having. And she listened to that, generous listening, and she then went on to structure some philanthropy in her school year around hunger and housing, homelessness. And her kids went into the community and they learned about food pantries, and they learned about nonprofits that were doing things around hunger and homelessness. They volunteered, they had drives, they did all kinds of things with philanthropy around the things they cared about. And she said that was pivotal in her classroom because she noticed kids started helping each other. They started talking about our classroom as our community. And she said it was just really remarkable, just listening and addressing the thing that they were caring about, not just by saying, you know, this is your need, but what can you do for it? It really made a difference for them. And philanthropy is a really big word, and we don't use it in our everyday, but I do want to invite you to use the word philanthropy because it's not about money, as a lot of people think. A lot of people think philanthropy is giving money like the Rockefellers, but philanthropy, which is the foundation of learning to give, is about caring and being in community. So I want to share this video, and I just want you to listen for the definition of philanthropy and what it has to do with your kids. Whoops. I think what the easiest thing for me to do is jump over to the website. Here we go. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second. Yeah, I'm good. I want to make sure the sound was on. Here we go.
Philanthropy. It's a pretty big word and an important one too. It comes from the Greek philo, which means friend. And if you translate it directly, it is love of mankind, or caring about your community. Philanthropy is about doing something with that love and care to make someone else's life better. Some people think it's about giving money to a charity, giving some of your treasure to someone else who needs it. Treasure isn't just about dollars. It could be a gently used toy, or a copy of a book you give to someone in need. That's part of it, but there are also two other T words that are just as important: time and talent. Giving of your time is a special one-of-a-kind gift because no one else can give your time away. Only you can. You could spend an afternoon serving lunch to kids who don't have enough food. You could play cards or share stories with folks in a retirement home. You might put together care packages to thank and inspire service members overseas. Or you could get to know Fido and help walk dogs at the local rescue center. Maybe you have a special talent. You're good at building things. Or you can convince others to join a cause. Anyone can be a philanthropist. Everywhere you look, there are opportunities to help. And in today's digital world, we can learn about what's going on down the street and around the world. We can connect and take action wherever we are. Think about it. You can donate a little of your treasure to help victims of floods or earthquakes in far-off lands. You can volunteer with organizations or inspire your classmates to make care packages when you notice a need. Even work virtually with others on the same goals, like an anti-bullying campaign or a clean water movement. When you share your time, talent, or treasure, it's like planting a seed. Before you know it, up pops a whole orchard. Your friends and neighbors see what you've done and they start planting too. They're smart. They don't want to be left out. Philanthropy truly does make the world go round. Without nonprofits and people who ask questions and seek answers, our society would be broken. Government and businesses can't possibly address all the issues, but philanthropists and givers of time, talent, or treasure can help fill in the gaps, and you have a role to play. From one little act of kindness, you can make an enormous difference. Oh, and here's the best part. Philanthropy is fun. Fun for those who benefit from your good work, and even more fun for you.
No matter what age you are, you can always help. I want to be helpful to people. I want to be kind to them so that in the future that people can help me.
It's nice to see people giving back, and it's nice to know that you're part of that.
It makes me feel happy and good inside. I like to know that people are getting a smile on their face because of the work that we've done.
Any thoughts on how you think engaging your kids in generous acts in giving might impact their trauma. Just wonder if any thoughts came to you while you were watching that.
I think that it's always been kind of known that when you are not feeling well and you're not feeling good about yourself, if you do nice, kind things for other people, it makes you feel better.
Any other thoughts? Teaching philanthropy helps develop self-awareness. As you step outside your comfort zone and get into situations where you're thinking of others, you're also developing awareness of what you're good at, what makes you feel good. We find that when we're volunteering, we often expand our interests and our hobbies. It also builds our community skills. It gets us out talking to people out of our comfort zone. And maybe we're in a community and realizing there are opportunities we haven't been exposed to before. You know, this is social emotional learning to care for self and others, developing respect and compassion for others, and building a sense of responsibility and good decision making toward a better world. And we can promote philanthropy in just about any place, any subject, and with lots of different activities. Pick up any picture book. Maureen and I have been diving into picture books and developing literature guides that are on our website. We'll show you. And, you know, we're just realizing that almost every picture book has a theme of generosity, of caring, of kindness. That, you know, it's just so prevalent. And so in your discussions, bring that out. Have those discussions and make that a part of your philanthropy as well as your restorative practices. And I'm saying that wrong, preventative practices for trauma-informed work. Let's see, I wanted to, I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to share with you on the Jamboard a bunch of resources that are on the Learning to Give website. And I lost you. I can't see you. Hold on. There. If you can see my screen, you can also see the Jamboard. I've listed some things that I think are especially key to help you as you're looking for things you can be doing. I saw as you were brainstorming around that chart that some of you are like, well, what can I do? What are some of those things I can do? Well, we've got a lot for you. And we're going to actually give you a little bit of time to investigate the Learning to Give website and start doing some planning. We'll give you some tools for it. The first thing we want to show you is a calendar. And on this calendar, it'll say things you can do in November to build caring. And it'll give you lessons and ideas. Another thing that I've checked here in red is a resource called Issues Kids Care About, that once you've identified, remember I talked about the teacher who found out her kids really were concerned about hunger? We have a toolkit on hunger, and it has lesson plans, literature guides, service project ideas, community resources, all kinds of things around that issue. Whatever issue comes up for your kids and for you, we're going to have a toolkit for you there. So I checked those two things. And then I'm going to just go on the website a second and show you some of these other things. Like here's a lesson plan called Words Bring Peace. This is great for mindfulness. Here's another one, Building a Caring and Inclusive Classroom. You know, great for having difficult conversations, or we should say critical conversations. So there are links here to these lesson plans. So I'm going to hop over to the Learning to Give website. Thumbs up if you can see the website. Okay, good. It's at learningtogive.org. It's a nonprofit and it's fully funded by foundations. We've been around about 25 years, and it was our goal from the beginning that every kid needs the tools to understand their role in the community. And as Maureen mentioned at the beginning of the call, every summer Learning to Give hires a teacher in residence from Wayne County. And Maureen did it 2 years ago. So that's an opportunity David will be sending out next March. So let me just show you a couple things on the resource on the website. It's very, very rich and deep. If you just want to get started, type a word right here and see what comes up, like maybe mindfulness, or you can see some things that I've typed in before. There's another search up here if you want to search specifically for a lesson or a resource. This drop down right here has a ton of stuff. The social awareness tool has cultural competency, it has SEL, it has building community. Here's the issues we care about page with all those toolkits. Here's a toolkit about equity and justice, humans in the environment, homelessness and poverty, and so on. I'll open the neuro and physical diversity toolkit to give you a quick snapshot. This is what's on the page: a story, definitions, key questions, some background information, lessons and activities, resources in your community, project ideas, and guide to service learning, and quotes. So just tons of stuff in here that will help you dive into this theme. So I'm going to back up. Lesson plans, I won't go into detail here right now. Literature guides, we have, right now the one featured at top is because November is Native American Heritage Month. So you can see literature guides that have Native Americans or Indigenous people in them. And the literature guides I'm just going to show you give you before, during, and after questions, and then activities to follow up. These are lessons in themselves. And each one of them dives into themes of giving and caring and generosity and community. These are fabulous tools. Next, simple safe service guides. These are grouped by themes. I'm going to just open one that's creative arts. So painting ladybug rocks and hiding them in your neighborhood, boosting someone's happiness with art in the community, ABCs of advocacy. I think this is making an ABC book. But each one is just a little mini project, and we probably have 30 of those just to get you started. Then I'm going to jump over to build community, because that's something we've been talking about today a lot. Here you're going to find our blue sky envisioning activity, the one I told you about, where you envision a future where something kids care about is solved magically. And then you have a discussion around that. It's a really powerful activity. And Map Your Heartbreak is another one where you dive into what do kids care about and how can they take action from that. I think, let me jump over here. Yeah, that's what I wanted to show you. And then we made a plan of action for you, and some of those links that I just showed you on Learning to Give are here. But I took, oh, that's what I wanted to show you. I'm going to just jump back. Way up here at the very top of the website is a calendar. And if you open, here's the events in November. If you click on the word November, it'll show those events, and then it'll give you resources around those events. So that's what I wanted to show you. But here's a planning calendar. So if you want to just get started thinking about how you might fit some of these practices into your year, maybe you want to start with November, like what's a mindfulness activity I might do? What's a community or service project I might use, or a Learning to Give activity, and just jot some notes. You might want to just do March, or you might want to do January. It's totally up to you what you do in this time, but we do want to give you time for planning, because that is something we don't get often enough. And we'll give you the link to this, and we'll share it with you as something that's forced copy. So you say, I want to copy this, and it'll give you your own so you don't write in the same space. Maureen, do you want to add anything to what I just?
Yeah, I do actually. Thank you. I truly love the resources available in Learning to Give. The website is so rich and so robust, and it has such a variety of activities, projects, lessons, lit guides for anything that I've really wanted to do with students. I have used Learning to Give resources in my classroom here in 4th grade. I've used Learning to Give resources as a youth group director and advisor, so working with teens. I've used it in a summer camp experience. What I've found inside there is a really great platform to launch into these discussions and these philanthropic activities and projects that I can take and run with it. It is so wonderful to literally, as Betsy said, type in, you know, a keyword that is important to my youth. You know, if they were concerned about the environment, that was something that my youth group was really worried about. I can find resources inside there, not just to activities, but literature guides, projects that we can do that are long-term or short-term. So it really is really rich, and it does span the grades. You know, I've used it with my 4th graders. I know that it's applicable to those students that are younger. I know we have several that are in that pre-KK area. Some of those certainly lit guides are very appropriate for them. And I've used it with my high schoolers who are graduating. So it really is robust. And I, as an educator and a youth worker, appreciate how it's organized and chunked in ways that allow me to kind of jump in and muck about. So we really wanted to give you, and at this point, I think we're at about 10 minutes, Betsy. Is that about right? To just explore and see where the resources that Learning to Give can support what you're already doing in the classroom, or challenge you to incorporate some of these mindfulness activities or philanthropic activities that will support the learning that you are providing, and really tied through that trauma-informed practice lens, in that those acts of philanthropy, those rich discussions around generosity are completely tied to the building community and the foundational practices of a trauma-informed classroom and educator. So really excited for you to check it out and look and see what is interesting and works for you. And we're going to invite you to go into your breakout rooms for this, correct, Betsy? Am I right?
I think we were just going to stay in the
we're
main
staying here.
room
Okay.
and just work quietly. It's a short time, and it's a time for you. It's not, you're welcome to mute, you're welcome to turn off your camera, but if you have a question, just pop back and ask. But I did give you the link in the chat. So go to that link and click copy, and then you'll have your own copy to save and keep, and then use that as a planning tool. So yeah, it's just a short 10 minutes of quiet work time, and let us know if you have any questions. So I'm just going to offer or invite you, if anybody wants to share one thing they found that they'd like to tell the others about, just unmute, and you're invited to take that second. Thank you, Keith. Any good finds? Any key words you used that were helpful? Might help somebody else? Everything on this site has been written by educators. Oh, good. Well, we have, if there isn't anything, I don't want to go too fast, but we have another little way to share. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to try Mentimeter, but you can do this on your phone or your computer. Go to www.menti.com. I just put it in the chat, and then enter the code 6229 7870. And then do what it tells you to do there. The question is, what words describe your reaction to today's workshop? And I'm sharing my screen because as you enter anonymously, the words will start appearing and it'll make a word web right across. And don't be afraid to write whatever you're feeling here. It's all anonymous. And you can write as many words as you want to. You're not restricted to one word. If you use this tool, it allows you to decide how many words people may use, how many times they may use it. So this is a way to get a really quick read on what your kids are thinking and feeling.
Betsy and I were intentional in setting up this training in terms of the mindfulness moment at the beginning, the class meeting idea, the reaction at the end with the Mentimeter. These are all things that you can do with your students and are all things that actually don't take a lot of your time to set up, but do give you a pretty good pulse on how your kids are feeling in things like the classroom meeting or this Mentimeter, or are resources that you can immediately put into play tomorrow with students.
I did put a second question up. What attributes do you hope to foster in a caring and inclusive way? So it does offer you the opportunity to answer a second question. Tracy, thank you for pointing out the literature. We are really proud of that. And Maureen and I spent a lot of time this summer, especially Maureen, doing an audit of our literature guides and making sure that they were culturally responsive and we're pretty proud of the excellent books there and good conversations. All right, so oh good, we're getting some words in here. And David, we're coming to the end, and I'm going to put your evaluation in the chat. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all. Respect and empathy, generosity, mindful, nice, calming. And the words, you probably know this about word webs, that the biggest words are the words that have been used the most. And I wish you all these types of classrooms. Let's see, jumping back to this. I just shared in the chat the evaluation form from David. David, did you want to say anything about this?
Not particularly. It functions the same as for any workshop that you have at RESA. Just to emphasize, it's really important to complete this, and it won't take long to do. So I think that's my plug. It's just, if you could please do that, we'd sure appreciate it.
You have our contact information here, and you can put our names in there. And David, I assume we choose other locations, not WayneRESA.
Correct. I mean, either way, all of the PD right now at WayneRESA is virtual, so people would understand if people accidentally check the other. But
Well, we're grateful for your time, and I know you're tired. And this was a lot of information in a short time. We wanted to slow down, but we also wanted to so thank you for being here. And Maureen and I are available for questions now or by email if you want to follow up at all. And Maureen, I don't know if you wanted to say anything at closure.
Nope, that was it. I'm happy to hang out and answer any questions that I can keep the lights on that you may have. You have our contact information, or if you don't, you will when we push out that information. So feel free to ping me with questions along the way. Happy to answer at any time. So I appreciate your time and your generous listening, and wish you well on the school year ahead.
Tracy, you have a question?
I think she's clapping.
Oh, I thought I couldn't